Hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. My name is Ravi Verma, and I'm excited to welcome you to another awesome Scrum Pulse panel discussion. Today we're going to talk about the topic of software craftsmanship and technical excellence and what kind of a role and importance they play in the professional implementation of Scrum. So we have an awesome panel here. Before we get started, I want to tell you just a little bit about Scrum.org. So Scrum.org is a mission-driven company. We are all united by one common mission, that is, we want to improve the profession of software delivery. And in alignment with this mission, we've created these conversations called Scrum Pulse. So usually we meet on a monthly cadence. It's a free monthly webinar, and we try to organize these along some unifying themes. Every conversation is an attempt to increase our focus on empiricism and agility. We try to use these conversations to enable the continuous delivery of business value, and we are hoping that through these conversations, we can help improve the trust and respect between business and IT. So how can you plug in? How can you make sure these conversations are relevant to your unique situation? You can view the previous webinars. We've got about 20, I don't know how many, I lost track, quite a few webinars, almost 20,000 views, a lot of powerful teaching moments there. And we'd love for you to tell us what conversations you want in the future. So please tweet your requests for future topics that are relevant to your challenges, and we'll make sure that we get some talented speakers to explore those conversations. So that's about Scrum.org and Scrum Pulse to provide some context. Some quick housekeeping logistic guidelines. Your microphones are going to be muted, but we do want to hear from you. So as you're listening to the conversation, if you have a comment, if you have a question, please use the question panel, and you can also tweet. So make sure that you mention the Scrum.org handle and the hashtag ScrumPulse. And we're going to be monitoring these feeds, and at the appropriate point in the conversation, we're going to inject your questions and comments. So with that, I want to introduce our panel, and I'm going to invite each of our panelists to tell us just a little bit about who they are, where they are joining us from today, and to tell us why this conversation is important. So Rich, can you kick us off, please?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I am Rich Visatsky. I'm the owner of Joint Insights, a small consulting company. I am coming to you from bitterly cold Milwaukee, Wisconsin. It's pretty chilly out there today. I am joining this conversation because I've always been involved in bringing good craftsmanship practices to the masses and making sure that technical ability is just up there as much with business need, and how those two really go hand in hand in trying to help and get the conversation flowing best between.
Very cool. Thanks, Rich. Simon.
Hello, good evening, everyone. My name is Simon Reindl. I'm based in the UK and train and travel all around the world trying to help people deliver better products. I'm really keen on this conversation as I see good software craftsmanship as a foundation for business agility. If you get everything working nicely, then you're able to really help your clients and customers.
Very cool. Thank you, Simon. Welcome. Next panelist, Mikkel.
Yeah, hi, my name is Mikkel. I'm joining from Denmark. I work for Openness, and I've been a software developer for more than 20 years. And I've seen so much bad code in my career, and it's kind of become my mission to try and generally improve the level of quality. So software craftsmanship, it's my game.
Very cool. Thank you, Mikkel. And last but not the least, Gary.
Hi, my name is Gary Pedretti. I'm coming to you from snowy, but probably not as cold as Wisconsin, Chicago, Illinois. It is snowy, and it's getting cold. I am the owner of Sodoto Solutions, a consulting company. I do a lot of training and coaching. I'm interested in this conversation because it kind of harkens back to when I first started getting interested in Scrum, and the first book I read from Ken and Mike Beadle, where they talked about XP, they talked about specifically technical practices, and a lot of that stuff resonated with me. And there was a lot of those lessons were the things that I took from Scrum that I thought, this is just kind of common sense, or this, I've seen this before, given a certain amount of experience. And I think that technical excellence is important regardless of your framework or methodology. And so it's a topic that's very interesting to me.
Very cool. Thank you, Gary. Welcome. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to hear some anecdotes and maybe some teaching moments from each of our panelists. So, Rich, can you tell us a little bit about what craftsmanship means to you, and maybe if you have a story that can help amplify your thoughts?
Sure. So, like I said, one of the things that craftsmanship means to me is always trying to go and make sure that you are doing the right thing technically while making the right decisions for your business at the same time, how those two kind of go hand in hand. A while back, I was a member of a development team that provided data services to a lot of other applications in a big product suite. And often we had conversations with these other teams where they would come over and say, hey, you know what, recent changes, whatever, something's busted, you did something wrong, whatever, you broke this code and now you have to go fix it, without really explaining anything else. So to take the professional route on that, versus the, well, no, it's not my fault kind of problem, we took a much more collective ownership stance on this kind of thing. Work with whoever came over to say, let's figure out what's going on. Like I said, we provided data services, so we had a lot of database unit tests, a lot of test data set up that we had to create manually just, to cover these different cases, to look through and see, hey, do we have this case represented anywhere, and make sure that's going on. Then we would start digging into source control together, and in our areas and other areas that other teams were managing, to try to figure out what's the source, how did things evolve over time, what's the real state of this application right now. So no blame on who did anything, but really just where did this thing evolve, what was it connected to, what was the need, and where are we trying to take it in the future. Then together we would try to figure out what to do from that. Do we improve our testing in our data services area, add things maybe that we were missing, work with whoever's coming to us to figure out what should be in there. Do we go into someone else's, some other team's section of the code base, help them add tests to their area, help them figure out how to consume the services a little bit more, and work collaboratively on the product as a whole, because if it wasn't all coming together in one piece, it really didn't matter. So both collaboration and communication excellence to help make sure we were all on the same page, as well as the technical experience that brought that up, ensuring that we were tested, everything was in source control, we were all working off of the same page.
Very cool. Thanks, Rich. I really like what you said about collaboration excellence, and really what you're maybe in a way you're talking about is empathy excellence or emotional excellence, where if something went wrong and we start attacking a person, that might violate the courage, focus, openness, respect, commitment, and then if people feel unsafe, then it may hamper empiricism, because without the trust there will not be transparency, people might hide. So I love what you said about the need to empathize, to support, to have collaboration excellence, because without that, technical excellence might not be possible. So Rich, thank you for sharing your perspective. Simon, any interesting insights, anecdotes from you?
Yeah, I think the epiphany for craftsmanship for me came when I was working on brittle systems, working on far too many brittle systems in large enterprises, which is far too common and is still far too common. A lot of the people I work with, they don't have stable environments, they don't have a stable deployment process. And once I was working with teams that were able to go into production smoothly with no disruption, really enabled everyone around them to then focus on what the clients wanted and what the business goals were. And so the light bulb went on for me that having a craftsman approach to building your product really enabled the rest of the organization to take a craftsman approach to customer and client service, which means that you then are able to lift the whole organization into a far more meaningful and responsive group, and really focus on product delivery as opposed to just building cool stuff or doing it in a very technically clever way, but to build anti-fragile systems that didn't cause grief going into production. And that then provides a basis for real agility, so that if the customer says, hey, we'd really like a widget on this page that does that, you can do that quickly, and it doesn't blow the doors off anything when it goes in. And building on Rich's point, the only way that works is to include people and try and build an understanding deeper and wider around, so that you know when you throw a rock in the pond where the ripples are going to go, so that you know you don't knock anything else over. And I've seen both the good side and bad side of that, as I'm sure anybody who's been in the industry for a couple of decades has, when you put a release in that just blows the doors off. And I've put in releases that take down entire data centers, unhappily. Mind you, I've also put in releases that are massive, and your customers don't even notice that you've put a major upgrade in. It's just seamless. And I know which one I would rather be holding my hand up and claiming partnership and responsibility for being involved with. And I think that's the real need as a whole community, is to really put a focus on minimizing disruption and improving stability of systems.
Very good. I like what you said, Simon, in that you could build perhaps the coolest gadget. Maybe it's extremely high quality and there's great technical excellence, but if there is not business excellence or value excellence, then what's the point? So it's technical excellence is necessary but not sufficient. Ultimately, we exist to deliver sustainable business value, and so you have to understand when you throw the rock in the pond, as you said, where the ripples go, both from an impact and stability perspective and also from a business value perspective. So very cool. So Rich was talking about collaboration excellence. Simon is talking a lot about business excellence. Gary, what are your thoughts on this topic? Any key teaching moment? Any anecdotes?
Yeah, some of the most satisfying things that I've done in helping teams and going through the journey myself have been around helping people break down and think about things in an incremental way, things that they typically think about in large monolithic chunks that relate to this craftsmanship topic, things like application architecture or technical debt. And that would be both obviously avoiding technical debt, creating technical debt, but also addressing large amounts of technical debt. Like Simon, I think it doesn't take decades of experience in the industry. I think maybe it takes a couple of days experience in the industry, Simon, to have that experience of coming up against a system that's got a lot of cruft, a lot of bad history in it. And oftentimes addressing those issues means helping people overcome some myths around Scrum, like the short-term thinking of Scrum inevitably results in technical debt or things like that, which are myths. And so that's exactly why some of these experiences were so satisfying for me. I think you'd also be surprised, I was surprised at how simple things, some very simple things can be done to address those things, and very simple techniques to help people through things like having lunch and learns for spreading the architectural knowledge across, doing pairing across specialties, not just coder with coder, but someone with maybe some more architectural specialty sitting with testers, sitting with coders, etc., to help spread that out. Real simple things that were incredibly effective. And these all had the effect of improving communication, and that wasn't coincidental. And they ultimately had to do with teams and technical people figuring out how to talk about technical subjects in the language of the business, so to make it real to them. And if any of you have tried to convince people that you want to, that you should spend some time to reduce technical debt, you may have come up against some common pushback on that in regards to where's the value. We need to learn to speak to that, and so those sorts of lessons and those techniques and that experience is something that I want to bring across today for the listeners to help think about those sorts of things and start to address some of these things, start to think about maybe technical things that they think about in large chunks, how they can deal with them incrementally, how they can really attack them effectively.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Gary. It's quite common. I've experienced that many times when, as techies, myself included, and we try to speak to business and we speak about the benefits of technical debt. Many times I've made the mistake of speaking in the language of geeks like myself. And then business is like, what's in it for me? Why should I care? You go figure it out yourself. It's so important for us to do what you're challenging us to do, which is to express in the language of business what's in it for them. What's more important is what is the risk we might be exposing our business to if we don't address the technical debt. So that communication excellence, building those bridges between the world of geeks like us and maybe the world of business, that's so powerful and important. So thanks for reminding us, Gary. Mikkel, what are your thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, so all of your stories really resonate well with me. I've been in a lot of the same situations, but I want to tell a story about one specific situation I found myself in a few years ago. I joined a team of developers that were working for a large bank, working on their custom-built content management system. So all the content that was exposed on the internet was hosted in this system. And I was joining as a developer, lead developer, and I got the link to version control, got the latest version there, opened it up in the development environment, and hit the compile button, and it didn't compile. I was like, hey guys, why does this not compile? They said, oh no, it does compile. You just have to compile it 2 more times and then it compiles. I'm like, what? So I compiled it again and it failed, and I compiled it the 3rd time, and lo and behold, it actually compiled without errors. I was like, what is going on here? Yeah, but it's because it consists of all of these separate components, and we have some post-build events that are pushing these things around. So the dependencies, it takes a little while for them to get all the way to their final destinations. But after 3 tries, they are actually where they need to be. I was like, okay, this doesn't smell right? There's something wrong here. Then I examined the compiler results as well, and there were well over 3,000 compiler warnings as well in the compiler output. So I was like, okay, I see problems here. This is it's not okay that the code compiles, but the compiler screams, "Oh, it's wrong! It's wrong!" So we had quite a lot of work ahead of us to clean this up, and we did clean it up, by the way. But the reason why it ended up in this situation kind of ties back to some of the stories of Rich and Simon as well, because this was obviously a system of not very high code quality, and as a result of that, there were a lot of defects being reported almost on a daily basis from production. And it meant that the development team, whilst building new features, were constantly interrupted with urgent bug fixing. So when I started addressing all of this, I got pushback from the business saying, no, you need to spend as much time as you can on building new features and just fixing the defects that are really important. Those compiler warnings, they're not compiler errors, they are warnings, so they're not really important. And I was like, but but we need to fix this, right? We need to increase the quality to enable us to go faster. And it's like we are too busy working in the wrong way to start doing the right thing. That was kind of the message I got from both the business and the rest of the development team. And it took some convincing and some people skills to get this turned around. And eventually we had a system that compiled on the first run and didn't have compiler warnings. And eventually we also built in a lot of automation of deployment and testing and so on. But those situations, they are not unique, right? This is not the only time I've seen something like this. I think most developers who have been in the game for a couple of years, they have been in similar situations. So it's just very symptomatic of our business that if we don't speak the business language, if we don't pay really good attention to technical excellence, code quality, and so on, we end up in a very bad situation that is very lengthy and very expensive to get out of. I want to help businesses avoid this. I want to help developers and not ending up in this embarrassing situation.
Got it. So Mikkel, do you remember a particular turning point moment where you said something or did something that made the business and made the light bulb go on, and business finally got it, that why should a compiler warning inhibit the delivery of sustainable business value? Is there any tip you can share with the other people who might be facing a similar challenge?
Yeah. So I think that that the key point that finally made it okay with them that we start spending some of our capacity on improving the quality, it was when we looked at the defect rates. They were not going down. They were not even stable. They were going up. Because we were adding more and more functionality to the system, and every time we added something, we broke something else. I told them that I truly believed if we did not slow down on implementing new features and actually focus on improving the quality, this trend would continue, and eventually we would actually have some catastrophic defects. And this is a bank. Some of this data is actually really important that they have in the system, and at some point it might actually go really wrong. And I think that partly the aspect of or the outlook of having fewer defects per day, and the outlook of not having to worry too much about the risk of catastrophic failures. That was kind of what pushed them in the right direction. So it was part stick and part carrot, I would say.
Very good. Sounds good. Okay, thank you. So we've finished kind of one round of key moments, key experiences where the panelists shared some illustrative examples that many of us can identify with in terms of what is the benefit, what is the value, and what is the impact of software craftsmanship or lack thereof on business value. So what I want to do now is I'd like to segue into the Q&A session. So this is your opportunity to tell us about the specific challenges you're facing in terms of craftsmanship. And there are a couple of ways that you can share your questions. It's very rare to have a panel of this caliber who can help you solve practical problems. So make full use of this panel. A couple of ways you can use the questions panel, or you can tweet your questions. Make sure you use the handle Scrum.org and hashtag ScrumPulse. So as these questions are starting to come in, I want to ask a question that I've heard a lot of different terms being thrown around. So I've heard terms like software engineer, craftsman, professional. Do you guys think these are interchangeable? Are they synonymous, or are there any subtle or drastic differences between these terms? So who would like to take that question?
I can start on that one. I have a personal beef against the term engineer because I think it lends a lot of sort of certainty to what we do that we don't have. But I'll set that aside. It's just kind of a never-ending debate. I'll set that aside and just contrast something like a craftsman. What is a craftsman? If you think back to the medieval times and what a craftsman there was, how someone was an apprentice first, someone eventually became a journeyman to learn from others in different guilds in different areas of their country or the world, and then only became a master. That's the sort of stuff that we're thinking about encouraging here, and you can see how that fits with the concepts of continuous improvement and the Kaizen and things like that Scrum and other Agile frameworks hold so dear. I think professional is something that we've talked a lot about in the Scrum.org community, and maybe that was initially prompted by a bunch of talk and posts and talks from Ken Schwaber about us needing a profession in software development. And if you think about what defines a profession, probably a certain level, a certain code of ethics, maybe a governing body, acting in an ethical manner, etc. And the example that Ken brings up a lot is kind of thinking about a doctor, and if he goes in for surgery, a doctor doesn't talk to him about a level of certainty that he doesn't have. A doctor talks about this procedure has a 70% chance roughly of succeeding. Here's some things where it could go wrong, etc. So yeah, I think Simon, maybe you had some comments I know earlier about sort of what defines a profession there, but that's kind of how I see those things.
Yeah.
Simon, would you like to weigh in? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. I think the profession is somebody who's committed to working within a particular space. I think the craftsmanship can really only be recognized by someone else. You can aspire to be a craftsman, you can work hard to be a craftsman, but the honor of being a master craftsman or a craftsman is recognized by your peers or betters. You can't appoint yourself as a craftsman. You can certainly work as a professional. You can be, as an apprentice, you dedicate yourself, as a journeyman, you dedicate yourself to improving and getting better. At a certain point, it becomes recognizable to others. And often that point, I would suggest using the conscious incompetence, conscious competence, you then become unconsciously competent to be a craftsman. You just do things very, very well, and you don't even know it. If you've ever seen a craftsman at any skill or profession, they make it look so easy. You watch a really good guitar player, you watch a great musician, you watch a great coder, you watch a great tester, you watch a great facilitator, and they just look like they're not putting any effort in it. So that, to me, that's the key distinction between a professional and a craftsman. A professional is somebody who's dedicated them to a set of practices or a code or a discipline, and agreeing or committing to follow the values of that profession, whereas a craftsman is somebody who has got that skill level where they inspire and motivate other people and do a handsome job at whatever they turn their hand to. They don't cut corners.
Cool. So would you consider there's almost like a hierarchy? Maybe first level is coder, so I can just code together. So, I can string together a bunch of lines of code. Then the next level is engineer. Okay, now I can string together code that is sustainable and so on. Then maybe the next tier is professional, so I'm bound by ethics. And then you have craftsman. I have mastered the art. And I have the unconscious competence that is recognized by peer. Would you? Is that the kind of hierarchy?
So, well, like Gary, the word engineer, I think is such a broad term. It's almost I struggle with using it within our industry. Having worked with an engineering firm, to be recognized as an engineer, a mechanical engineer, a civil engineer, electronical engineer, you have to be recognized within the Institute of Engineers, and there is a whole piece of work and a dissertation that has to be done for you to be recognized that, whereas unfortunately in the computing world you can just put software engineer on your CV and bish bash bosh, you're an engineer. I struggle with that term, but I digress. I think there is a hierarchy. You'll start as a hobbyist and move on.
Yeah. As someone who has a degree in computer engineering and worked with others who were in chemical, civil, mechanical, etc., I too see that the term engineer is abused in our industry. But when like you were saying, there is a level of certification and kind of designation you can get. I tried to pursue the professional engineer designation because I saw a lot of value in that, and it's really hard in a computer and software industry to do that. But the thing I got out of engineering was focusing on solving problems and trying to do that in a cost-effective way. So if that is what people were using engineering for, great, right? Because we're focused on what are we trying to accomplish and how can we do that in the best possible way. It doesn't always apply, especially not in the way that software engineers usually go. So that's my take.
I just have a brief comment here as well, and it's the fact that for more than a decade, people like Ken Schwaber and Robert C. Martin, Uncle Bob, have talked about this strange situation we are in when we are in the software development industry, that it's very hard to really call it a profession, because if you compare it to any other profession, people have an agreement, either written or just inferred agreement on how do we do things. What are the good ways of building stuff, crafting stuff, and so on. What are the good tools to use? What are the good techniques, and so on. And the software development industry is so diverse that it's very, very hard to come up with a set of rules or guidelines or rules of thumb even that people will universally agree to. So calling us a profession of software developers is a bit of a stretch, right? But that's just all I wanted to say here.
Got it. Cool. So I hope our listeners get some nuanced understanding of what these terms mean, and there may not be a black or white definition of each of these terms, but I think we can walk away with an appreciation of the complexity and how different people may interpret these words to mean completely different things. But I think no matter what term we use, I think it would help if we had an appreciation that to be an effective craftsman, you have to have almost multifaceted. You have to demonstrate excellence in many different facets, which might include ethics, coding, or engineering practices. It's not one-dimensional excellence. So it's a good conversation. So I want to talk a little bit about frameworks. So do you guys see, what do you see as the relationship between frameworks and delivery methodologies and software craftsmanship? So someone might be practicing waterfall, someone might be practicing agile or Scrum. Does it matter? Does it matter more in one or less of the other? Can anyone shed some light on this question?
I'll just make a brief comment to start the discussion. In my perspective, a craftsman can work with many frameworks. A real craftsman is not bound or focused on using a single framework, and I would expect a modern software craftsman to work within Scrum, within Kanban, within Lean, work in Scale, work with Waterfall, understand the nuances of each of these frameworks, and be able to build a really useful product regardless of the framework they're working in.
Michael, your thoughts?
Yep. So I fully agree with you, Simon. And want to add to that there are some really good frameworks out there. So obviously, I believe Scrum is one of them. Kanban is another. But I feel that in most organizations where I've been applying these frameworks, these organizations need something else because they are enterprises. They also need they need to have the entire value stream from idea to end of life of an application covered, and Scrum or Kanban or other of these frameworks don't really cover that. So either they take on one of the more heavy frameworks. I'm using quotation marks here, such as SAFe. In my mind, that's a methodology, but that's just a religious thing. I'm not going to open that can of worms. But in most of the companies I've been working with, they have actually ended up with some bookend stages or phases of the life cycle of an application or a product. Some initiation that needs to happen first, and some closure that needs to happen at the end, and then in the middle we can use a pure framework. We can use Scrum or Kanban or Less or Nexus or whatever it might be, but to get things moving, to have people available that can start working on this, to have a backlog to start working from, to have attention to all the technical details and so on, so that we end up with something of high quality. We need some initiation of some kind. We need some people with a high level of maturity that makes not a plan, but kicks off the project or product development in a good way, so that the foundation is in order. I'm not talking about building the entire architecture or anything like that, but just making sure that people actually have the tools and the skills necessary and so on, so that we put these people together, give them the requirements, and then we trust them to do the best that they can. So it often ends up looking like a methodology wrapped around a framework. That's a bit how I see it. I don't see frameworks applied just in a void. It's being applied into an organization, and they need something more.
I'll just add.
Go ahead, Gary.
I'll just add that I agree with everything that's been said so far, and that a craftsman would be able to work in almost any context and still be a craftsman or a craftswoman, craftsperson. And so there's the capability part, but I would also say that there's the importance part, or the compulsion part. You need craftsmanship, whether you're doing waterfall or Scrum or SAFe or whatever. You need it. If you're building software, you need it. So there's another angle here, which is the importance or the compulsion part, not just the capability.
So I have a question.
What I heard both you. Just 1 second, Ravi. What I heard Mikkel and Gary describe is that a craftsman is able to discern the organizational constraints clearly and articulate them to others, whereas people without that skill and maturity will often struggle to define the boundaries of the sandpit they're allowed to play in.
Yeah. What I like, yeah, and what I like about what Gary said is it's like a compulsion, right? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether in waterfall or SAFe. You have a commitment, almost a framework agnostic commitment to excellence. So it doesn't matter what framework. That's a core value. I wake up in the morning and it's in my blood, right? It doesn't matter what framework, the office that I'm driving to, what they practice. It's in my blood. I can't just leave that at home, right? It's a compulsion. It's a commitment. It's a passion. So very good. So I want to take this conversation down to the practical level. So many of our team members or many of our colleagues work in extremely high pressure environments where there is relentless pressure to deliver more and more features in less time. And many of our colleagues are kind of overwhelmed. They are buried under this staggering weight of a legacy code base, where you've accumulated sins, many decades of sins of being under pressure. So the code quality is suffering. So let's walk in the shoes of one of our listeners whose every day is under these in this pressure cooker, and they're listening to what we are saying, but in their mind they're saying, this is all pie in the sky kind of BS, theoretical nonsense. I want to improve the code quality, but I have so much pressure. So can you guys share any practical techniques? And this is kind of a question from Ollie. What techniques do you use to improve the code quality in the team? So maybe Mikkel, if you could get the ball rolling and share some practical techniques.
Sure, because this is very, very similar to the story I told before. And I would say that applying the Boy Scout rule first and foremost is one of the best techniques I've seen and applied myself. The Boy Scout rule says you should always leave the campground a little prettier than you found it, or a little bit nicer than you found it. And the same goes to your code. So every time you open up a code file and start working on it, make sure that you leave it in a bit nicer state than it was before. So instead of just adding 5 more lines of code to a method that is 120 lines long already, think about how to refactor it so it becomes a little bit easier to comprehend, a little bit easier to read and understand, so that the next time you get in there, it will be a faster change that you can make, and it will be easier to test and so on. So apply the Boy Scout rule. If you have technical debt in the form of things that you can assess automatically, such as compiler warnings, static code analysis warnings or errors, or other kind of code metric errors or numbers, then apply an aspect to your definition of done that says it cannot be allowed to get any worse than it is right now. So this is what I call the ratcheting method. It's like a ratchet that you use for tightening nuts and so on. It can only go one way. So you say that every time you check in code, it should have less compiler warnings, less static code analysis warnings, a little bit better code metrics, or whatever other numbers that you have. Because applying the Boy Scout rule, it might not change the numbers in itself, but it will improve the readability. This is something that only human beings can assess. But applying ratcheting on the automatically accessible numbers, such as compiler warnings and so on, that will gradually improve the situation. It might not go very fast, right? But you are kind of putting a cork in the hole. It's not going to leak anymore now, and we will gradually improve the situation a little bit. And when you do that, just one final comment here. When you do that, you are improving the code quality of the files that you actually touch. And it doesn't matter that you have a whole bunch of code files that you don't touch very often and the quality is bad, because you don't have to deal with that, right? If you improve the code quality of the files that you touch all the time, then they will become a bliss to work with, right? It will be really good quality after a while, and that's what matters.
Yeah, and the fact that you're working on those suggests that you probably will be working on them. Right? That's an indicator that you'll probably be working on them more often in the future. They're not a dead subsystem there. And I really like what you're saying. It builds on some of the stuff I was talking about earlier. In that small things. What are small things that we can do to get better? The static code analysis and compiler warnings thing is always so many funny stories that I've seen, witnessed, and then I tell the story and everyone nods their head of the first time you turn on static code analysis on the build server, and it kicks back 4,000 warnings, and somebody in management sees that, and everyone's like, "Oh God, we got to turn that off. Just turn it off." They saw 4,000 warnings, and the thing to use with those tools is not to use them as absolutes to say, I'm a bad person, I'm a bad programmer, or what. It's a tool in which you can use to get better. Forget about the absolutes. Forget about 4,000 compiler warnings, and focus on exactly what you said, Mikkel, which is it getting better? Focus on the trend, not on the actuals. a colleague that Rich and I worked with talked about, rip the labels off the y-axis, right? I don't care what the absolutes are. Rip the labels off the y-axis. Just what does the trend look like? That's the most important thing. Rich,
very good.
Yeah, so just two other things to kind of add to that as far as that taking that incremental step. I think one thing you can do to kind of deal with some of this pressure and you want to improve, the quality of code, but you're looking to do something is if you're in an area and it's not very well understood, wrap a test around it, even if it's huge, right? It's just to have an idea of you're asking me to make a change in this area, it could impact something else. We should at least know that we didn't break something here, right? And if you're like Mikkel and you're working in an area that was in banking, right? That could be really important. Even if you're selling, costumes online, around the holiday season, that's also important, right? Just to make sure that your stuff still works. And then as far as dealing with the pressure, I think, trying to figure out how to relate back, your need to improve quality towards a business need at the same time is a good thing. Saying that I'm not trying to slow down because I don't want to deliver value and find ways to make our company money, right? Our company making us money keeps me working. It keeps me employed. So I am trying to do that. But if I push too hard in this kind of area, we will slide back in this spot. You could be costing us money in the future. You're doing like, those crazy compiled, horrible quality loans that created a financial crisis, something along those kinds of lines that just speaks to too short-term vision, right? Small gains that really don't help you out in the long term for your business that is supported by the code that you're actually writing.
If I could just tag on, just quickly tag on the back of that. Rich was saying really focus on trying to lower the defects. What's worked for me before is to track the amount of waste in a cycle. So within your sprint, track how much time you're losing to looking after defects, track how much time you're losing for fixing something, track how much time you're losing through poor requirement definition, and then just take it back to the management and say, look, we've lost 12,000 pounds this sprint, 12,000 monies. If we did this and this and this, we could save 12,000 monies. And just use the language the business likes. If we start talking about code completion and code analysis and static code, their eyes glaze over. You may as well just say blah, blah, light bulb. Whereas if you just say, we've lost loads of monies, they'll go, oh, we're not paying you to waste monies.
One thing a coach or a leader can do is to help people understand that static code analysis. You can talk in the robot voice to remind people that all you're doing right now is talking tech talk, and the business just hears, you as a geek.
Very true. So I think my two key takeaways to answer Ollie's question was in terms of what techniques do you use to improve the code quality. One was, Mikkel said, the Boy Scout rule. Every file you touch, leave it just a little bit better. And the broken window syndrome, it might be like 1 million windows are broken, but don't use that to justify breaking another window, right? I mean, there might be a lot of trash on the ground, and that's okay, but don't use the existence of that trash to justify throwing your trash on the ground, right? Walk over to the trash bin and throw your trash there, right? So I like that. I like the ratcheting idea. I like integrating the Scrum, the artifact or the mindset of the definition of done to say, you are only allowed to make things better. At the minimum, don't make it worse. So that was some simple techniques. And then we have static code analysis. And then also when speaking with business, talk in the language of business. So how do you monetize excellence? Or what is the monetary impact of excellence? So key points. And I think the other thing I heard was it's almost incremental excellence, right? So don't feel like you have to do 3 sprints or 4 sprints of technical excellence, because then you're going back to waterfall thinking. So thin vertical slices of excellence. What are baby steps I can take? I have one last question before I want to introduce the resources that you have found to be most compelling. I hear a lot about DevOps and CI and CD. What is the connection between all this DevOps, CI, CD, and excellence? And also, do you feel what is the connection between Scrum and DevOps, CI, CD, and excellence? So is Scrum compatible with CI, CD? And so can anyone talk about that?
So I think I was first to raise my hand. I feel that DevOps as a movement is a natural progression of Scrum and Agile in general. I think it's Ken Swaber who used to say that if you're doing Scrum the way it was intended, then you don't really have a need for the term DevOps, because then you would actually integrate both business and operations into your product team instead of thinking projects and so on. And how it then ties to CI and CD, so continuous integration and continuous delivery and continuous deployment and so on. Again, if you apply software craftsmanship to any kind of method you're working, waterfall, agile, Scrum, Kanban, whatever, then you would automatically get to a point where you want to eliminate the amount of human effort going into getting business value into the hands of the end users. So you would start automating stuff. So first you would automate your build, then you would automate your tests, and then finally you would automate your deployments. And now these terms have just gotten, well, more or less well-defined or well-agreed definitions. It's not completely agreed, but close to. But it would have been something that most teams with a high degree of craftsmanship and a high aptitude and maturity, they would get to that point eventually, even without having these terms and then without having this hype in the market as we see today. So I feel that if you really want to do continuous integration, continuous delivery, and continuous deployment, you must have an agile method. It will not work in a waterfall setting because you need to build your system in very, very small increments, and you get that automatically by applying an agile method. So it is a natural next step, both the DevOps culture and then all the continuous aspects. It kind of falls naturally if you apply craftsmanship to Agile.
Very good. Rich, closing comment on that topic?
Yeah. So I think thinking of continuous integration, continuous delivery, and DevOps in general, getting stuff out into production faster is only one part of it. The other part is actually making sure that the quality of what you're putting out there and the path that it takes to actually get it out there is high the entire time, right? Because if you build something that doesn't work, you're going to know about that sooner. If your deployment pipeline is screwy and you have an issue with like a patch or the way the database gets set up or the way that services integrate, you are going to notice that sooner, right? And so you have this automatic feedback mechanism that comes in that helps you improve the quality of your code. And the quality of your entire pipeline, the whole way. Plus, if you're doing it well, you're instrumenting things such that you're learning from production, right, and figuring out what comes back. How do you feed that back in to make future business and technical decisions about your product? And then, as far as how does DevOps and continuous delivery, et cetera, relate with Scrum? Just to dispel a myth, you don't have to wait until the end of a sprint to deploy anything to production, right? As soon as something is done, once it meets the definition of done, and you actually have a solid increment there, go ahead and send it out, right? We do use those periodic reviews to kind of take a look at as well, not just what did we build, but how has the market changed? How have we changed as our team, right? What kind of things go along there that we might want to inspect and adapt upon. But when things are done, they can go out, Scrum or not.
I would say that totally agree with that. That's a myth, and it does, like you said, the only thing that you need to think about is does change the dynamic of the sprint review slightly, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. The other thing to simply answer the original question, how does this fit in? Does Scrum stop you from doing it? No, I think that agree with Mikkel that the DevOps and the continuous delivery world takes the gold standard. It's just a natural evolution of Scrum, taking the gold standard to something that's potentially shippable and moving the gold standard to something that's actually shipped. So that's one simple thing. And then the second thing is DevOps. It's right there in the title. It's Dev and Ops working together. where do we have a cross-functional team inside of Scrum? If I put an operations person on my cross-functional team, bam, DevOps. So there's nothing at odds here with Scrum, to answer the core question.
I'll jump in and be really controversial and say DevOps is a subset of Scrum. Scrum is biz DevOps.
Wow.
Where Scrum is holistically looking at the entire pipeline. My first Scrum team that I worked with, we did the whole thing. We're focused on getting it in production. If you're not concerned about getting your code into production, I would suggest that you're probably not a craftsman, you're probably not professional, and you're probably not doing Scrum. So
okay. Yes. So excellence is thinking about production, thinking about business excellence, collaboration excellence. So so let me start summarizing the conversation. So as we look back at the topics we've covered, you can and must practice craftsmanship and excellence. It's agnostic to your methodology, agnostic to your technology stack, agnostic to your industry. And craftsmanship and technical excellence are indispensable, and Scrum does not give you a license in the interest of delivering something to production. Scrum is not endorsing or enabling lack of craftsmanship or excellence. In fact, Scrum, there's a greater need for craftsmanship and excellence in Scrum and in Agile frameworks. The Agile hangover that's suggested by the quote that was suggested by Mikkel here, so from the Software Craftsman book by Sandro Mancuso, it says, many Agile projects are steadily and iteratively producing crappy code. So guard against this. Is this your interpretation of Agile? The other thing is Scrum enables ratcheting. Scrum enables incremental improvements in craftsmanship and excellence. You can apply the roles, cross-functional teams, definition of done, roles, events, activities, and artifacts of Scrum to increase the level of craftsmanship. No matter where you are, that's okay. You may be buried under legacy code, that's okay. Make it just a little bit better. Don't make it worse. And I like what Rich was saying. It's about blameless retrospectives. Don't blame a person. Use collaboration excellence and have empathy and enable transparency and trust so that you can exercise empirical and incremental excellence. Elevate craftsmanship across the team. And finally, something that both Gary and Simon were mentioning, you've got to be able to monetize craftsmanship and the cost-benefit analysis in the language of business, and get help from a coach if you need to. And maybe this is another facet of collaboration excellence or business excellence. Some resources, maybe I want each of the people who suggested this maybe to say a sentence or two about why you recommended this. So Agile Manifesto, how does it relate to craftsmanship? Briefly.
I don't recall who recommended it, but I definitely back it.
Yeah.
So the principles behind the Agile Manifesto are very often forgotten. People usually know the 4 values, but they don't pay a lot of attention to the underlying principles, and they're actually just as important as the values. So if you haven't seen them, to the agilemanifesto.org and click on principles.
Absolutely. And we have the continuous attention to technical excellence and good design enhances agility, and we have to reflect on how we can get a bit better. So I think I lost track of the time box. I'm going to breeze through these. We have the Manifesto of Craftsmen, Software Craftsmanship, the book Continuous Delivery by Jez Humble and David Farley. We've got the book The Software Craftsman by Sandro Mancuso. All of these will be available in the slides. Refactoring databases, the Phoenix Project, and then we've got the Lean Enterprise. So with that, I accidentally pressed the link. I want to go to the next slide. This can be pie in the sky, but if you want to learn how to apply this in the real world, sign up for the Professional Scrum Developer course. This is just a hint of the kind of practices you will actually be able to roll up your sleeves and learn. You can take this course in .NET, Java, generic. You can take a public course. You can have a private course where the theory meets, the rubber meets the road, the theory meets practices. So you're not alone or helpless. we can have people like the expert panelists who will come to your team and help you execute. Today was just scratching the surface. Continue the conversation, go to our community discussion forum, ask questions, read blogs from experts like the panelists that we have here. Continue the conversation, join us to improve the profession of software development. Tweet our panelists if you have questions. Maybe they can spend 15, 20, 30 minutes in a conversation with you to help you apply what we discussed here. So with that, it was a great conversation. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you to all the panelists. Thank you to you. Have a good day or good night, and I will see you at the next Scrum Pulse. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye all.